Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney, and I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And it's my pleasure to present our speaker for today, Randy Scher from the Rutgers Master Gardeners program. Randy has had a lifelong interest in nature and spent her youth prowling in a local swamp, climbing trees, and hobnobbing with wildlife. Asking the question, what is this plant and why is it here? Eventually led her to become a Rutgers environmental steward, a naturalist at Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve, and a Rutgers Master Gardener. She is an enthusiastic member of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey and the Northeastern Organic Farming Association. She also runs a local community gardening group. Randy and her husband are homesteaders who stay busy growing vegetables and herbs, tending bees and chickens, and expanding the native plant palette on their wildlife certified and PHS Blue Ribbon winning property. Her passion is in helping others see the joys of getting to know native plants and welcoming wildlife in their own yards. So we really appreciate you having you today, Randy. And we look forward to learning about what we can do to kind of prepare our plants in our gardens for the fall, because as much as we think of we got to get our gardens ready in the spring, and that's really important, getting them ready for the fall and winter is just as important. So we're really excited to have you. Um, Before we jump into your presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions periodically today, so please submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. At the end of the webinar, there will be a survey available. So if you have time, we ask you please complete the survey. We really appreciate any and all feedback that you can give us. And there's a lot of different resources out there, and Randy's going to highlight them at the end of her presentation on kind of how to prepare your garden for the fall. But you can visit the Xerces Societies at the web address on the screen there, and they really focus on keeping your garden safe and beneficial for insects that can help with pollinating and soil health and a whole bunch of different things. So I encourage you to explore that if you want some more information. One last thing that I have for you is just a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure it's connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you have issues, there is a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that and that'll alert me. I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you are having. And then, as I mentioned, if you do have questions, we'll be stopping periodically, and you can use either the Q&A or the chat buttons to get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to address those questions. So that is everything that I have for you. So Randy, you can take it away.
All right, terrific. Thank you so much for the nice introduction, Andrew. And let's see, how's that looking for everybody?
Great.
Hopefully good. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for stopping in this afternoon to learn something about what we can do for wildlife in our yards. I'm excited to talk to you. And I go by Miranda or Randy. You can refer to me as either one. So today's talk is about how we can rethink what we're doing in the garden in fall. And spoiler alert, also how we can rethink what we're doing in the spring, with a view of making our yards accessible and nurturing to nature. I am with the Rutgers Master Gardeners of Hunterdon County. I definitely recommend anybody who has even a passing interest in gardening or this program to check it out. It's about a 6-month program of classes, but it happens during the day. There's a lot of support from other people attending, and you don't need to know anything to become a Master Gardener student. So these are some of the things listed that we do. We do helplines, plant clinics, we do programs with certain segments of the community. We do information booths, and one of the essential services that we provide is if you have any type of a garden question, you can contact your local extension service, and the master gardeners there will help you diagnose the problem for free. So take a look at that. This is the contact information for the Hunterdon County Extension Service. And if you're calling in from another county, which I'm sure you are, I think just about every county has one of these except possibly Warren County. And then you can just kind of choose another county to call. Okay, so here's the major question. Why do we need to rethink our garden cleanup at all? Well, I know it's going to come as no surprise to anybody who's here today, but there has been a lot of species decline for a lot of different reasons, but habitat loss is one of the major ones. And as a result, we really have to take a new view of what we're doing in our own yards. Traditional fall cleanup, where we rake and scrape and we kind of remove any brown debris and we get it looking nice and neat and kind of like a blank palette so that we can be ready to garden in spring. It turns out that is really not what wildlife and nature want us to be doing. In addition, not only does it not take into account the needs of wildlife and plants themselves, it's really hard on us, both physically and financially, and we'll get into that more. It's important to know that fall and winter are still very ecologically active periods. If you're here, that probably means that you have at least some concern or interest in wildlife. So we have to ask ourselves the question, why do we invite nature in for spring and summer? Why do we put up feeders for hummingbirds and want to see songbirds and all the other animals if we're just going to remove their habitat and their food sources for fall and winter when they really need them? I want you to know that we're not really talking about rules going forward. What I'm trying to present to you is a flexible menu of options because everyone has a unique situation on their own property, whether their property is all lawn, whether they have a garden, whether they do any farming. Your needs are going to be very individual to your family and your lifestyle. And so there are many different techniques here that you can incorporate to hopefully keep you happy and also the creatures in your garden. So today I'm hoping to change your your perception of what we consider brown waste and that debris that I mentioned, give options for their use, and also challenge some garden beauty standards while we're at it. And the best part of this is everyone can do this. You don't need anything. No, you don't really need any special um, knowledge or that many tools to get involved. So here we go. Well, I thought we were going to go. Here we go. Okay. So I'm going to start out with kind of the largest thing on our properties, which would be a tree. And nature really needs to get a new marketing team because a dead tree is known as a snag. And it's not a very saleable name, but a snag is an extremely vitally important resource for all types of creatures. Snags, as they're left standing and they slowly decompose, they become habitat and food, and especially for insects. And another spoiler alert is I personally garden for insects, which is a really big sea change from when I started gardening 20 or so years ago. And I was concerned when I saw insects or bugs chomping away at my plants. Now I am concerned if I don't see that happening because I want my garden to be ecologically active. Plants have to do more than just look good for me now. So going back to that decomposing wood, insects find that as a great resource for homes, for foods, for reproduction, and in turn, birds will forage for insects in the decaying wood all throughout the year, all the seasons. Small mammals use it for food storage. Um, Tall, or not even that tall, but standing snags are vantage points for all types of birds of prey, also songbirds. And I think you can see in this picture to the right, that is a snag that we kind of created, which I'll explain in a moment, on one of our fence rows. And you can see a little tiny bluebird at the top. They seem to love these bare trees. Um, so moist rotting wood can also serve as a substrate for growing mushrooms, which is very valuable to wildlife. And decaying logs and stumps are absolutely necessary for the complete life cycles of many things, not only insects, but turtles, salamanders, tree frogs, and more. And finally, the smaller components of a dead tree, like branches, sticks, and twigs, are used by wildlife for nesting, for cover, and as they break down over time, for soil enrichment. So, a great quote that I love is that standing dead trees serve as a restaurant, hotel, and dating site all in one place. It's a does it all type of resource. You can see by the graphic over on the right how different animals might use a dead tree. And in this picture, you can also see these holes in the tree. So cavities of all sizes in snags and dying trees are also utilized by all types of wildlife here in New Jersey and really throughout the country. Um, People tend to think, and I was one of those people, that if you see a cavity in a tree, it means the tree is dying or dead. It's not necessarily so. Lots of trees can continue growing for dozens or hundreds of years with hollow interiors. And as a matter of fact, there used to be all types of these trees dotted across the landscape, and they eventually became a den tree. And some of those residents might have been bears. Sometimes they were people camping out, they were so large. But I want you to know, if you have any concern about a tree that you care about that is not dead and it has a cavity, doesn't mean it has to be cut down, but you can always ask an arborist just to be sure. So there are animals, lots of birds that use solid snags because have the ability to excavate like woodpeckers do. And they can make their own holes in a snag, whether it's decomposing or not. And there are also birds that can't excavate, so they like to go to previously used cavities. There are also mammals like opossums and bats and porcupines and weasels that like to shelter in these cavities as well. Okay, so when I mentioned creating a snag before, on my property, and I've got a lot of photos of my property in this presentation, it looks a lot larger than it is in the photos. It's really just over 2 acres. But sometimes we have had trees that had to be removed for various reasons, or sometimes we actually just took dead trees from somebody else's property and put it on ours. But I have found as a garden design enthusiast that a created snag, it really lends a lot of appeal. It adds height and it adds kind of like a punctuation mark on your property or your garden. So this photo is of two logs that we sort of rescued, and we propped them up and wired them to a garden post. And over time, we have had various generations of several birds. I guess a woodpecker came along and first excavated a hole, but eventually it became home to Carolina wren, who I love seeing in spring. I assume it's not the original Carolina wren now because this has been going on for about 5 years. And you can also use a created snag. I mean, granted, some of these things are heavy, so they might not be real tall unless you have a lot of help moving it. But you can use them visually too as supports for edible or ornamental plants. And you can put more than one together like we have done here. So lest you think that this is just one crazy person's idea of garden beauty, these are some photos that I took this summer at Chanticleer Garden in Wayne, which is billed as really one of the best botanical gardens in the country. So I really recommend you get out there if you can. But they've had a lot of trees die, particularly ashes. And I noticed that what they do now is they leave them standing wherever they can. And I think you can see what I mean by looking like a punctuation mark. It's fantastic that mainstream horticulture and even high end horticulture has really embraced more natural processes in garden designs, even ones as like very carefully curated as at Chanticleer. So here are some options for dead wood. That the goal is always to leave a dead tree standing if at all possible, but you can modify it according to the needs of your property and as I said, in your lifestyle and family. If you have a snag and you want to leave it standing, but it's posing some sort of a danger, maybe you're worried that somebody's going to walk under it right when a branch falls, you can just cut those overarching branches or trim them. Um, there's something called a coronet cut. If you don't like the look of a tree that has had, a clear sawn edge to it, you can do it yourself or have an arborist cut kind of like a zigzag on those branches. It's supposed to mimic how a branch that had fallen from a tree actually looks. And also, when you do something like this, it increases the surface area that insects are able to gain entry into the snag for. So if you have a snag that has to be cut for some reason, you cannot leave that tree standing. You can cut it down into manageable sizes and use them as habitat logs, which is an actual term. And what I have done on my property is I've incorporated them into a lot of my different garden beds, where I think they look terrific. And it's really interesting to be able to go out in your yard and see what's happening with that decomposing wood, which creatures are there, which mushrooms, and just kind of watch it change over time. Um, you can also consolidate biomass that you have by constructing brush piles, and you can put those in out of the way places if you have a bigger property. And you can also use them in Hugelkultur gardening, which is a German word which I have found very, very useful on my property. So this is my front meadow on the right, this rounded area. It was pretty poor soil when we got here. The topsoil had been stripped off the property. It wasn't a great place to start a garden. So what we did is we took a bunch of rotting and decaying logs and we laid them down, and then covered them over with soil and also some other garden amendments. And what's so great about this is not only does it help raise your soil, so there's more room for plants to form roots, especially if the ground has been compacted underneath. But those rotting logs absorb moisture throughout the seasons. So as your plants grow, they're reaching down into those spongy materials of the wood so that you don't have to water as often, which is really important for us in this front meadow because our hose is really hard to get out to that area. Okay. So habitat logs look great. There's no other way I can say it. Look great with the flowers and foliage that you want to highlight in your garden. They're just a great natural backdrop. I think, in an evolutionary sense, our eyes read that as soothing and like nature is happening the way it's supposed to be happening. So these two photos are from one bed in my backyard where I've got some lovely native plants that are doing quite well and really seem to be snuggling up to that habitat log. The goal of keeping wood on your property is always top of mind, but there are so many circumstances where you might not be able to do that. Um, but if you can at all, if you can't leave a dead tree standing as a snag, if you can't lay it down as a habitat log, you can also think about having them chipped up and left on your property as a mulch pile. Use it as mulch or a part of a brush pile. There's lots of wildlife attracted to chipped wood as well because it's already closer on its way to degrading. Birds, reptiles, amphibians, insects, small mammals, and also the things that hunt them, which you do want on your property if you're going to have any type of ecological processes happening. And this photo is of a snapping turtle that somehow got over my deer fence, ambled into our property, and laid eggs in a pile of chipped wood that we have. So we are anxiously awaiting to see if they will be hatching soon. It's a big question about how this snapping turtle got over my deer fence, but somebody told me recently that they can climb, which I did not know. So on my property, I I see myself as an ecological and a wildlife gardener, but that doesn't mean that I don't like things neat and tidy. So on part of our property, I have a kitchen garden, which is where we grow fruits and vegetables and plants that are pleasing to me for some reason. Maybe I use them as herbs, or maybe they are, great pollinator plants because I like to watch wildlife when I'm out there. But I have also found that sometimes the hard edges of more formal parts of your property are just a little too stark. So I had this idea about taking some of the smaller twigs, really branches, and using them kind of like a created snag, but on a smaller scale, and using them for height and drama. So these are three photos of different areas in my kitchen garden. I think almost every area of my kitchen garden now has tied up branches, and hopefully, you see something agreeable like I do. It lends drama. It lends just more heft to some designs. I have a metal garden arbor, which can look pretty stark. So this year I took some of our branch trimmings and I just tied them up with good old jute and string. And what's interesting is I started growing some vines, like this one here is a Thunbergia, which has grown all the way up here and it's kind of like dripping off. It's beautiful. The birds love it. They're not rotted enough for insects to be using right now, but eventually that will happen. Okay. Another way that you can
And I think her internet can out. She'll be back momentarily. We've talked about this as a possibility.
buddy,
All right, you're back.
did I lose you on this slide or the one before?
Yeah, on the hedges.
Okay. So again, here's the dead hedge, simple concept.
You have to reshare the screen. Coming back in.
Sorry. How's that? Everybody there?
Nothing yet.
Oh, gotta love living in the country.
All right, there we go.
Okay. All right. So here's the dead hedge, two different seasons. It's just those twig piles piled into the ground with branches woven in between. And what we do here on our property is we use this space behind the dead hedge to also get rid of any extra garden trimmings or invasive weeds that we've pulled that don't fit anywhere else, like our compost piles. And you wouldn't believe how quickly this material degrades and improves your soil, and again, provides refuge for wildlife. Another thing you can do if you don't want to be as considered as a dead hedge is just to make brush piles. It is a very, very quick and easy thing to do. You can feature it or you can put it in an out of the way place. I have multiple brush piles on my property, and I'm happy to say that I've seen foxes in them, I've seen possums, and I've seen all types of insects, and birds like to forage there as well. So you might be thinking to yourself, wow, this is a big departure from how I was taught to garden or how I've been gardening all these years, and what will the neighbors think? And if you live in a close community or more of an urban setting, it is, something you should think about. So there's a concept called cues to care, which basically means that in a wilder yard, you can do certain things to cue the neighbors into the fact that you are doing this on purpose and that you are taking care of it. It's not untended. It's meant to be this way. And one of those things that you can do is post some signs. I have these two on my gate, but I have friends who have just put them on posts in their ground. And hopefully, it inspires curiosity. You might have some conversations with your neighbors and they might ask you, hey, why are you doing this? And you can tell them. And the Xerces Society and the National Wildlife Federation are two great resources for all types of information. They also offer these signs. You can have your yard certified, and you can even have signs like this made up on Etsy, which I have seen. Okay, so that's it for dead wood, but now we'll move on to another poorly marketed gardening resource, which is leaf litter. Um, Very, very valuable in many ways. They are a resource for all types of minerals. When you leave them on your property and allow them to decompose, they get into the soil and they enable soil to hold up to 32% more carbon than soils that have no leaves, which is extremely important in this time of climate change and worrying about greenhouse gases. The leaf litter supports microorganisms, which make healthier soil. And you'll find that over time, areas where you have let the leaves degrade naturally on their own degrade more quickly because they encourage vaster quantities of these microorganisms to get busy and do their work. Uh, Decomposed leaves improve moisture retention. As I mentioned before, kind of like the same thing with the logs, the leaves can hold water when they incorporate with the soil, which is a really important concept in New Jersey, where we seem to be having this pattern of no rain and then a ton of rain. It can help mitigate stormwater runoff, prevents erosion. And another great function that they have for us is weed suppression. And on my property, which is a kind of a wettish property much of the year, except when we're in drought, we have a considerable problem with Japanese stiltgrass. And what I've noticed over the years is that there is no stiltgrass underneath my oak trees where I let the leaves fall. And that is because oak leaves have a higher percentage of tannins in them, so they break down more slowly than, say, a maple leaf does. And that leaf cover acts as a mulch, and it suppresses the seeds of Japanese stiltgrass from propagating, from germinating. So what we're doing is we're actually ringing our property with oak trees so that we don't get as much of a problem as of the Japanese stiltgrass seeds blowing in from our neighbor's property. And so far it's working really well. Um, Leaf litter also is essential habitat, as we've discussed, for many creatures, insects, lizards, frogs, turtles, birds, and it can help protect young plants from weather extremes, and the leaf litter moderates soil temperatures. So the thought I want to leave you with on this slide is that all fallen leaves are valuable, but the leaves from keystone plants, which are oaks, willows, cherries, and quite a few more, host the most life. And a keystone plant is one which has been found to be a food source for the highest number of insects. And if you know anything about Doug Tallamy, who is an entomologist and a professor, hopefully you can see this, at the University of Maryland. He has found through his research and the research of others that oak trees are probably one of the best things you can plant on your property because they host over 500 types of insects. Okay, and here are some insects which need leaf litter to survive that you might be very familiar with. And that cute guy sitting on that leaf right there is a firefly. I'm happy to say I have lots of fireflies on my property. I have friends and family who don't have that, and it's because firefly larvae need leaf litter to complete their life cycle. When they fall off the tree, the larvae kind of like exist just on that leaf layer right between the leaves and the soil. And they can stay there, some types of fireflies, for up to 2 years. So you can see why removing leaves is going to, wipe out one of our favorite summer sites. Leaf litter is also important for different types of moths and butterflies and bumblebees and even stick insects, which we do have here in New Jersey. I haven't seen one on my property, but I'm remaining hopeful. Another concept which is something that I learned not too long ago is that of soft landings. So if you think about the life cycle of an insect, some insect comes along, it lays its egg on a leaf. The egg hatches, it munches those leaves, it grows into a beautiful fat caterpillar, which is also food for birds, let's not forget, and lots of other animals. But at some point when the season ends, those insects literally fall to the ground. Some of them climb, but most of them fall down. And if they fall onto hard, compacted soil, or let's say there's a volcano of mulch, which is pretty much impenetrable, they're going to perish. So a soft landing is any area underneath a tree which acts as a cushion or a spring. And fallen leaves very much provide a resource as a soft landing, but you can also put plantings underneath a tree. And For my husband, who actually trained as a landscape architect, he was taught very different things when he went to school 20 plus years ago. So we had neatly trimmed circles under all of our trees on our property, but they were lifeless. So he agreed to let me experiment for a year or two, but he is totally sold on the concept now. And what is most important is trying to make those circles or those areas underneath the trees as large as you can. Ideally, they should really expand to the complete canopy of the tree, but any amount that you can offer them, the insects for that leaf litter layer and plantings is going to be golden to them. And I do try to put underplantings of natives under my trees. This is an example of being in the right place at the right time. I just happened to be standing next to this mixed leaf and brush pile that I had when I saw something dart into it. And in the first picture, it's really hard to see, but here it is blown up, and it's a male looper moth. You can see how evolutionarily it's so important for it to be near fallen leaves for camouflage. I was really happy to see that, and I've got my eye out for more so I can get more photos. Okay, and what happens if you have a smallish property or you happen to have a lot of leaves and you just cannot leave them where they land? Understood. Um, Hopefully you will try to leave leaves whole and where they land. And that's kind of exists at the one end of a spectrum where that's the best practice, leaving them whole where they land. And the other end of the spectrum, which is the least desirable outcome, is bagging up the leaves and having them go to a landfill. And that is bad for so many reasons. I mean, obviously, it would kill any wildlife that's in there. It's not nurturing your ground, it's not acting as a mulch or a soil conditioner or erosion control or stormwater runoff. But also, when they go to a landfill, the leaves decompose through anaerobic means, which means without the presence of oxygen, and that emits methane, another very, very potent greenhouse gas, which we are eager to cut down on. So whatever you do, try not to have them end up in a landfill. So you want to keep your hardscape areas and walkways clear. Nobody's debating that because safety first. But you can use fallen leaves to mulch your bare garden soil as an actual mulch and leave them there as long as possible or hopefully permanently where they will degrade. And it's pretty much agreed upon that for beds and borders, a layer of about 3 to 5 inches is right around the sweet spot. If you're gardening with native plants, and I hope you are, they are well suited to coming up under leaf litter. Even if you garden with things that are not native, more ornamental or exotic in nature, as long as you have that leaf layer no more than 5 inches, shouldn't be a problem anywhere. You can also take leaves to a compost bin, and the end result will be a beautiful soil conditioner, which you can spread on beds and borders. You can put it in a hot compost pile, same result, a little bit more quickly than a cold pile, which is what I have here, but it does the job and there's no extra work involved for me. And also, those decomposed leaves are biological activity boosters. They feed soil life, which gets all the processes in motion. Another option is to shred the leaves. Rather than removing them from the property, you can put them in a leaf shredder, or you can take a lawnmower and, mow over a pile of leaves. Obviously, that's not great for wildlife, but it is still going to be very good for your soil. People worry about having leaves on their lawns, but research shows that having less than 1 inch of leaves on your lawn is really okay. It's not going to kill your grass, but anything more than that really will. It's up to you if you want to leave it on your lawn or not, but if you see a few leaves fall, don't panic, it'll be fine. You can also take that mower that I mentioned and mulch over the leaves on the lawn areas, and that also helps to increase the vitality and the performance of your soil under the lawns. So to sum it up, the order of least harm to insects is first to leave leaves alone and whole, then to go to raking, then to go maybe using a blower and blow them into a different area, and finally mowing. And we're not even going to talk about bagging them up and bringing them to a landfill. One thing I could say though is if you have to bag them up and get them off your property, offer them to neighbors. There's a lot of gardeners who really want this because you can go to the store and buy leaf mold, but it's costly and it's a lot of labor to bring all those bags out and spread them all out. So you'd be doing a friend a favor who gardens. Now we're on to stems. Stems are also a critical place for many insects. About 30% of native bees are stem nesters, and that includes one of my favorites, carpenter bees, also mason bees and yellow-faced bees and all kinds of bees. Most stem nesters need hollow stems. That is, they need a stem, or if it's cut into a cross section, there's already a vacant space inside. And here's a listing of some native plants and a couple that are not, that offer that kind of structure and where I have seen a lot of insect activity on my property. There are also insects, just like there are birds, who prefer pithy stems. And that means in a cross section of a stem, there's usually a white or a tannish substance on the interior that is firm, but it's kind of frothy and it's kind of like easy to scrape out. And that includes coneflowers, which is a very popular plant, mountain mints, goldenrods, asters. So both are really needed on your property if you have them. And one thing we can do as gardeners, which is really great, is we can actually help insects. I mean, so far I've really been talking about getting out of the way of natural processes. Hold on, I'm just going to do a check because my computer is telling me something happened. Hopefully you're, Andrew, are we still there?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, sorry about that. Is we can cut those stems because it increases the accessibility, particularly for the ones who don't excavate, but also some of the excavators. It just makes it shorter for them. And here's a great diagram of leaving stems standing from perennials over the fall. In other words, you don't do anything in the fall to the stems of your perennials whatsoever, which might be a new concept for people. But if we take a look at the life cycle of a typical stem nesting bee, um, we leave the dead flower stalks intact over the fall and the winter, but in the spring, you can cut back some of those stalks, but leave a stubble, heights of 8 to 24 inches, which is what research says the insects are looking for to provide the next nest cavities. And a female bee will emerge in spring and she'll go on a hunt for some of these hollow or pithy stems that are already cut open, and she'll start a nest. She will put a pollen ball at the bottom and then put an egg on top, and then usually put in some sort of barrier and keep the process going. Pollen ball, egg barrier, pollen ball, egg barrier, and fill up that stem as she is able. And over the summer, those eggs will hatch, they become larvae, they start feeding on the pollen, and they remain in those stems through the summer, through the fall, through the winter, and then they will finally emerge usually in the spring. So they have a very long life cycle inside of those stems. So as a gardener, what do you do in the spring? You still leave those plant stems alone, but any new plant stems that you grew from last year, you can do the same cutting technique. So here is a close-up of some little cuties. My favorite carpenter bee. Here they are as the little whitish larvae. And here's a mason bee who has used, it looks like I don't know if that's a stem, it might be even some type of smaller bamboo cane, but sealing it up with mud. There's all different types of techniques for all different types of bees, and there are so many wild types of bees. It's truly a marvel. Okay. So what they call that is stem stubble, and it's a very easy thing to do. So you just take a break this fall, you sit back with your cup of pumpkin spiced whatever, and you kind of like let nature happen on its own, and you don't really worry about it until the spring. But in the spring, you'll cut certain stems. They find that the most useful stems are between 1/8 and 5/8 of an inch in diameter. So if it's a really skinny little stem that's less than 1/8 of an inch, it's really not going to be a host too much. But you want to leave heights of 8 to 24 inches. You can cut them all at the same height, or you can alternate on your plants. You leave them permanently. And if you have to remove stems for any reason, you can kind of like gather them up, maybe tie them off with a piece of string and prop them up somewhere in your garden. You can even lay them down and they'll ultimately be used by something. If even that's not an option, you can use the chop and drop method, which is basically you're standing there with a pair of pruners and you take your twigs and you cut them up into smaller pieces and let them fall onto the ground so that the nutrients they contain will eventually recondition the soil and enable soil life to continue what they're doing. There are certain plants which are, turn mushy, their stems, and it's fine to remove those if that fits in with your aesthetic values more. That's usually with plants that are not native, like daylilies, hostas, and peonies. And finally, also remember the dead hedge technique if you have like a big quantity of stems that you need to find a home for. All right, seed heads. They are wonderful things. But if you have seed heads on your property from invasive plants like Japanese stiltgrass, you want to remove those seed heads or hopefully even remove the plant before it goes to seed. You can dispose of those seed heads in the trash. If seed heads haven't formed, obviously you can compost the rest of the plant material as long as it's not going to reroot from any structures that you left on the plant. The key here is to mow or remove invasive plants prior to the seed maturing. For stiltgrass, that means that you want to get busy at the end of August. On our property, we had to do a big Japanese stiltgrass removal, but there was just too much of it to weed by hand. So we took out the weed whacker and the mower, and right before it went to seed, which was really right about the midpoint of August here, we chopped those plants to the ground. And if you have a Japanese stiltgrass problem, that is like the most important piece of information to take away from this. If you have plants that you want more of, you want to leave the seed heads up all autumn and winter. They will feed migrating birds and resident birds, and they will disperse themselves. If you have some plants that, okay, maybe you like a few more plants, but you don't want a whole host of them, you can prune the alternate stems, and you're providing habitat for stem nesting insects and also getting what you desire from a design perspective. You can collect seeds from plants that you want more of. You can sow them on the ground immediately or store them. But I urge you to remember that seed heads are beautiful. They are beautiful to look at in the fall, in the late fall, in the winter. Here is an example of a native mountain mint that I have on my property, which I just find to be gorgeous. I'm so glad it just seeded itself on my property, and now I want more and more of it. Some of these seed heads are also beautiful in fall plant arrangements if you do that type of thing. And here's some coneflowers that I left standing. A lot of the seeds were eaten by goldfinches, but we got a beautiful snowfall, and just look at the forms that were made because we left it standing. So much more interesting than a barren yard. Okay, in my kitchen garden that I mentioned, I had some Verbena bonariensis, which is this beautiful purple plant, not a native, so it's okay for me in that contained garden, but I did not get to cutting off the seed heads in time. And the following year, I had a big problem in my strawberry patch. That's why this is all in a cage to keep out chipmunks. So I urge you not to do that because then it was kind of difficult to remove them at all. But that's just a great example of a self-seeder that you want to have some control over. And on the right is a common milkweed plant, which I let seed freely throughout my yard because when it comes up in the spring, if for some reason it's in the wrong place, very easy to pull. But I find I always want more of it. In your yards, covering the soil is an important concept because it stops weeds from germinating, it stops erosion, and it prevents nutrient loss. But you can leave small areas here and there for ground nesting insects, which also includes some types of bumblebees and others that are really beneficial to have in an ecosystem. You can make an effective plant mulch of leaf litter. You can plant cover crops. You can have any type of plant debris to cover bare soil over the fall and winter. You can use living plants, which I'll have an example of in the next slide, because then you don't even have to worry about mulching or have the expense and the labor of doing it. Cover crops improve soil and can in turn be used as a mulch in the spring. We tend to plant winter rye, which continues to grow somewhat over the winter, and then we kill it by scything it off, and then we use those long grasses that do not have seed heads yet as a mulch. I'd caution you to not use too much wood chip mulch because it can depress plant growth, can encourage disease, can encourage mice and other things next to your plants that you probably don't want in some areas. And it can also be a barrier to rain penetration, and insects can't access the ground because it's a little too compact. Avoid any dyed wood mulches because they are made from questionable sources, lots of construction debris and things that you really would not want on your plants or on your soil. You can use a light mulch on newly installed plants, which is something we do here because it helps moderate that soil freeze and thaw over the winter. You want to keep mulch away, any type of mulch right away from the base of the plant. And just be careful if you have leaf mulch and say you think you want to make it look neater in some way by putting wood mulch over it, that compression could kill any overwintering insects. So here's a picture on the left of wild strawberry, which we use for a green mulch underneath our blueberry bushes, which is working out fantastically well, and underneath some spice bush that we have. And on the right is a plant which I am trying to get started in my garden. This is not my photo, but it's called golden ragwort. And I have it here simply to illustrate that a green mulch doesn't have to be, a very short plant. It can also be a taller plant, and this gets up to 2 feet tall when it is flowering. I know we've all heard of overgrown yards, but undergrown yards is something that I like to think about. And I certainly do notice when I'm driving around, if somebody's yard consists of just lawn and nothing else, I'd call that undergrown. Um, Grasses and shrubs that are left standing through the winter offer birds food and protection. Native bunch grasses are larval hosts to different butterflies, like this wood nymph on the right, to bumblebee queens. There are many other creatures that overwinter in dead meadow and border plants. And by leaving any grasses standing, it helps protect the crown of that very same plant and protects the roots from swings and weather. There are lots of birds that like to shelter in dead meadow materials. So little thing on meadows, I'm not sure how big your property may be. You may or may not have a meadow, but I get this question a lot. You don't have to mow your meadow every fall or every spring for that matter. You do want to mow it occasionally because it's a meadow. It mainly consists of perennial plants and you want to stop shrubs and trees from growing there. But you can mow, as best practice, 1/3 of your meadow every year. So you pick a different segment every year to mow. And the best time to mow for wildlife is in late spring, because that way the insects and creatures have gone through their part of their life cycle over the winter. They emerge in the spring. Not all of them will, but hopefully some of them will escape the mower. But if you have an invasive plant problem, fall mowing is your best bet. Like we talked before, just before the plants set seed, you want to set your mower to the highest setting so that you can avoid mowing up anybody that you don't want to get caught up in there. And you don't just have to mow, you can use all different types of tools. We've used weed whackers and a scythe and pruners to get rid of certain things. And just as a reminder, you can put native meadow seeds from native plants down in the late fall or the early winter, as long as they have good ground contact. Here's a photo of one of our naturalized meadow areas in late winter, and I like to think of it as an English muffin. It's got all those nooks and crannies, right? Instead of butter, we've got insects and birds. And another reason for leaving things standing is goldenrod galls and these these orb-like things that you might see on twigs of other plants. They contain tiny little wasp larvae, which is an important winter food source for birds. Okay, and this photo here on the left is one of our meadow areas that got out of hand with Japanese stiltgrass. So we kind of went in and selectively took out what we needed to, and look at the recovery. The roots of the perennials that we wanted were still there. Japanese stiltgrass is an annual, so it didn't have time to seed again. There were no roots that came up from last year's. So the same area was vibrant and beautiful with native plants the following spring and fall. So, lawn, I know everybody's heard the message to reduce your lawn. It is one of the most important things you can do, but it's okay to have some lawn. I don't want anybody to feel guilty for having lawn. I have lawn. It's not a great lawn because ours is a matrix of different species, but any green thing that is mown reads as lawn to the eye, so it's another cue to care. Research has found out that if you mow every 2 weeks, it supports the highest number of bees. Um, Leaving it longer than that actually doesn't help the bees because some of the grassy plants get too tall and any flowering species that are in there are hidden from the bees. So 2 weeks is the sweet spot. And as a reminder, rather than bagging up and getting rid of grass clippings, leaving it where they land is fine because they will degrade and improve your soil. But you can also use it as a mulch or a compost. And again, a light smattering of leaves on lawn is fine and won't kill your lawn. So we're at the end. Here's a picture of one of my front meadows in September. Got goldenrod, got a lot of different species in here. I love the contrast of the neat pathways with the, more wild and vibrant perennials, which are serving as a great food source for migrating monarchs as well as songbirds. And here it is in January. By leaving things standing, it adds form and winter interest. So a summary of today's presentation, and thank you for sticking with me, is that these ideas are customizable. You can take it anywhere you need to take it to suit your purposes, but hopefully you can incorporate some of the things that will encourage nature in your own yard. It's a menu of options. It's not anything that anybody says you have to do to be a good gardener. You can do what you can, where you can. The new rules recognize food, shelter, and habitat are year-round needs for wildlife. So we have to, because we don't see them doesn't mean they're not there. So we have to, provide for them in fall and winter. These methods work with nature. They take the health of our gardens, resources, and the plants themselves into account. And it is easier on your back and wallet. You don't have to go out purchasing mulch and compost and soil conditioner and schlepping it home and getting rid of the containers. Nature is already there to help us do that. And here is a photo that I took at the Philadelphia Flower Show a couple years ago. I just wanted to show you how accepted kind of this idea of leaving dead materials in your yard is. I think it's a beautiful representation with the spring growth of daffodils, the contrast of the green against the brown. Brown is still a color, and it's important that we have it in our yards. And the final slide I have for you is another photo of my front meadow. I like this because, like I said, throughout, I'm going to leave everything standing as long as I possibly can, if not forever. So this little suet cage, which should have suet in it, really isn't as necessary because I've got plenty of goldenrod galls and other things to feed the birds over the winter. So thank you again. Here is a list of the sources that I have used for this presentation. You might want to take a screenshot of it, but I think at the beginning of the presentation, Andrew mentioned that xerces.org is a great resource. There's so much information on there about wildlife and how to handle your yards that I encourage you to take a look at it. And that's it. So if we have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right. Thank you so much, Randy. We really appreciate all the information you shared. If anybody does have questions, you can use the Q&A or the chat to get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to address them. How do you kind of touched on this before, but how do you manage milkweed coming up in the lawn?
Well, if it's coming up in the lawn, and you don't want it, you're going to mow over it, and eventually, it's going to die because it won't be able to photosynthesize. So I wouldn't worry about that. I mean, sometimes I have it occasionally where I don't want it, and I just pull it. And milkweed, depending upon the type that you have, it might be common milkweed. It spreads not only through the seed, but through underground rhizomes. So potentially that could be a problem, but I can tell you on my 2 acres, it hasn't presented one for me, but that's also because I kind of want it everywhere. But I would say just mow over it early. You don't want to wait till something is using it as a host plant and then mow it over. So yeah, take care of it as quickly.
We have a small yard. Can we use leaves instead of mulch? We have lots of trees and leaves.
Absolutely. Leaves make a fantastic mulch. Um, if you're talking about again beds and borders where you're if you're growing vegetables or you're growing perennials, 3 to 5 inches is the key. I sometimes use mostly somewhat composted leaves on some of my vegetable beds. And what I do is just, make a furrow to put in seeds, and everything seems to come up just fine through it. But I wouldn't put, a dense layer of big, thick, non-composted leaves over a vegetable bed. In beds and borders, you have a little more leeway because the plants that are in there usually are perennials and they're going to come up right through that. But yes, it's a great, great idea.
Is there a specific name of the type of gardening that you shared today? Person would like to learn more about it.
Absolutely. I found out I'm an ecological gardener or wildlife gardener. You can Google either term and you'll get an awful lot of information. What's really encouraging is, I started off by saying, yes, we've got habitat and species loss, but so many people are hopping onto the train of being aware that our yards are where nature lives. Especially in New Jersey, we're going to be the first state which has no more buildable land in another 30 years. So that means that welcoming wildlife wherever we are, not just our homes either, schools, businesses, houses of worship, every place can become an ecological functioning system. So there's so much information on the web. Xerces Society is a great place to start, but I mean, you kind of can't avoid the information coming at you if you Google those terms. And I would really recommend, I'm glad you asked that question. Um, I don't know if you can see this, but it's a book by Doug Tallamy called Nature's Best Hope, which shares a lot of the concepts that I've talked about today. He wrote another book, which is actually my favorite, The Nature of Oaks. Sounds like it's going to be a dry thing, but it's fascinating. Lots of pictures, lots of great information. And finally, there's a gardener that I follow. She calls herself the Humane Gardener, Nancy Lawson. She's written a book, she's got a blog, she's quoted everywhere, and she does a lot of public speaking, but that's another great resource.
It seems like there could be a trade-off between keeping snags, down trees to branches, etc., and the occurrence of termites, which might be a deterrent to homeowners. Can you talk about the role that termite considerations might play, both good and bad?
Well, I will tell you, if you've had a termite problem, you definitely want to consider it, like you're asking. I don't pile any dead wood next to my house. I leave a perimeter around my house of a good maybe 8 feet, maybe even 10 feet before I have anything like that. I've never had a termite problem. Doesn't mean other people don't have that problem. It doesn't seem to be a big occurrence where I live, but I also haven't really heard through my, master gardener resources or other people that I share, gardening with having had that problem. But I'm not going to say that it doesn't occur. So I would just say keep it away from your house, like do like an 8 to 10 foot barrier or even more, like I said, if you've had a problem in the past.
We can give it a couple more minutes to see if any other questions come in, but I know you kind of gave a summary already, but is there anything you want to emphasize or stress before we end the program?
Yeah, I would say don't worry about being perfect. I threw a lot of concepts and a lot of information at you, and I've been learning about this for quite some time. But really, any small step that you can do to leave any of this material on your property is a step in the right direction, and just take it day by day. None of us are perfect. None of us are going to have a 100% naturalized yard because gardens, by and large, are. Uh, Not natural, which is okay because we need to live here too. But there's plenty of things that we can do to make our yards more hospitable and just don't go with the aim of perfection, but the aim of progress.
All right. What grows well in acidic soil under pine trees?
Are you asking for plant suggestions?
I think so.
Well, I have to tell you that not on my property, not a lot grows under pine trees because the pine needles themselves, as they're cast down, seem to suppress growth under the pines, which is for me fine. That seems to be what happens in nature. If you take a walk into a natural stand of pine trees, you don't find a whole lot of ground covers there. I guess it's possible if you have the right type of moisture levels in your property that blueberries low growing blueberries might be an option. Even uh, the native strawberry that I mentioned, the Fragaria, could be an option because that tolerates higher acidity levels. But sometimes people overestimate just how acidic the soil is under pines. A lot of times when those needles fall, they're already brown. They've kind of lost some of their acidity. So it might not be as high as you think. And you could definitely get a pH meter to take a measurement and just see what you're dealing with. And then look it up, Google it. Like I look up native plants for under pine trees and then mention the pH level and see what it comes up with. I do have something on, hopefully on here. If I don't have it, I'm going to mention it now. It's called Jersey Friendly Yards, which is a wonderful resource if you're looking for plants for certain conditions in your yard. You can put all types of filters on it, and it's going to recommend native plants of all different varieties. You can ask for a ground cover, put in the type of soil, put in the type of sunlight that you have, the moisture, etc. And again, it's Jersey Friendly Yards.
I have a Colorado blue spruce that died. What can I plant around the base?
Hmm. I guess that would really depend upon where you have that planted. I'm gonna I'm gonna suggest that you go to Jersey friendly yards for that as well. Colorado blue spruce doesn't tend to live very long in New Jersey. We don't have the right type of environment for it. They usually do well for, say, 10 years, maybe 15, 20 years, and then they die. There's not a lot of old Colorado blue spruce that aren't being, meticulously cared for. So if you're going to leave it as a snag, it's an opportunity to create, a whole new bed around it. So it could be virtually anything that you want, depending upon what your sunlight level is and your soil conditions. But if you go to Jersey friendly yards, you can, type in the all the conditions that you have, and it'll spit out a whole bunch of options for you.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much, Randy. We really, really appreciate it. You give us a lot to think about, and hopefully we can all kind of put some of these things into practice and create more sustainable and more natural yards. So,
Fantastic. Thank you all for attending. Thank you so much, Andrew.
all right. This program was recorded. A link will be shared with everybody who registered once it is available. And the Rutgers Master Gardeners has asked that the links only stays with the people who registered for this. So please don't go share this out to all your friends and family everywhere, as this is one of the resources that allows the Master Gardeners to continue their public work. So um, just be mindful of that. So everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you.